Hey guys, another cool week of Come Follow Me. So this week is Genesis 5 and Moses 6. Genesis 5 is pretty much like a book of remembrance or like a genealogy type thing. Enoch gets a total of 4 verses. That's it. So we're going to learn about Enoch, so we're going to focus in Moses. So everything I've taken is from Moses 6, but do read Genesis 5. It isn't that long, and it will give you an idea of the fact that they did keep family history and the years that they lived, although I don't know if they're the same years that we count, because that's a long time to live. I don't know about that. That's a university lecturer type question, so if you know, let me know. But, yeah, I don't get into that kind of thing. They lived a long time, much longer than we do now. But whether their days were the same as our days, yes, but I don't know if their years were the same as our years. I don't know. But anyway, so we're going to go into Moses 6. Now, the first sort of few verses are the same as Genesis and just kind of give us that genealogy, or that they call it a book of remembrance because in the chapter heading it says Adam's seed keeps a book of remembrance. So it just talks again about a little bit of Adam and Eve and what happened, and then, sorry, it's nothing, empty bottle. And then, have you heard that? Otherwise, anyone didn't marry. And then it just like talks about them. So we get to the fact in verse 23 that and we're going to come back to that one because that's when they taught their children, and they had split off into different societies, and because there was a lot of them by this point, several generations creates a lot of kids, so they were in like different cities and different places. Now, Enoch enters in really in verse 27, so we're going to start there and focus our first insight on that. So let's read Moses 6 verse 27. That says, "And he heard a voice from heaven saying, Enoch, my son, prophesy unto this people, and say unto them, Repent. For thus saith the Lord, I am angry with this people, and my fierce anger is kindled against them. For their hearts have waxed hard, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes cannot see afar off." Now, where have we heard words like that before? Let's go back to Book of Mormon times and talk about those that were hard of hearing and blind to see. Where we talk about them being... my chair's sinking again slowly. Or we talk about them being... I can't remember the name of the word. We were talking about it last night. But anyway, where they just, like, they don't want to see with anything. They just don't want to know about it, about the gospel and the way of living. So this is where Enoch begins. The story of Enoch begins here, and Christ calls him to go and teach. So we're going to learn a little bit about Enoch this week, because next week is also about Enoch, because Enoch, thanks to Joseph Smith's translation of Genesis and the extra that he puts in there, because we know it existed. If you have a testimony of Joseph Smith, you know that the sources he used are correct and he put them in. They were left out of the Bible, but we have them in the book of Moses. And there's an extra 117, something like that. 116 verses. Interesting. 116 pages. I wonder if there's something to that. Anyway, there's an extra 116 verses because Moses 7, also about Enoch. But we learn that the people had become hard of hearing, the words of God to the words of God, and had dull eyes to see his divine goodness. Enoch was called as a prophet to teach his people. He was just ordinary according to him. In fact, he thought of himself as less than. And we read that next, I think. Yeah. But we'll learn about that. He thought of himself as less than. He said, and we're going to read that people hated him. And who doesn't feel like that sometimes? Like, all the time. I have felt like that. I know now that I have a good bunch of friends and I'm very grateful for them. Hi you guys, if you're watching. But I've been hated on too. I've gone to church and people hated on me. And it's not a nice feeling. So, he felt like less than. He didn't even feel like a regular dude. He felt less than. Yet, God calls people like this. Why? Because they're humble and teachable. So keep that in mind. He qualifies them in the process because they are humble and God-loving. So the Lord calls who he qualifies. Well, the Lord qualifies who he calls. Now, we would do well to read of Enoch and be more like him and less like the world. More like Enoch, less like the world. Because what happens to Enoch? The city of Enoch happens. And the city of Enoch, because Enoch walked with God, he converts a bunch of people. They love him so much. They live in a city, the city of Enoch, otherwise known as Zion. And that's the city that gets lifted up. And we get to read about that next week. But for this week, let's learn about Enoch's beginnings. But a prophet that particularly liked to talk about that the Lord qualifies those who he calls was President Thomas S. Monson. So my first two quotes this week are from him. Sorry if you can hear those noisy motorbikes in the background. That's our wonderful, crappy neighbourhood. Anyway, so the first quote that goes with this one is, miracles are everywhere to be found when priesthood callings are magnified. Now I'm going to point out here that priesthood callings are any calling that requires getting set apart. That is a priesthood calling. So that includes young women's, primary presidencies. I'm an institute teacher. That is a priesthood calling. I got set apart for that calling. So that is a priesthood calling, not a calling within the priesthood, a priesthood calling. Okay? Right. So miracles are everywhere to be found when priesthood callings are magnified. When faith replaces doubt, when selfless service eliminates selfish striving, the power of God brings to pass his purposes. Whom God calls, God qualifies. President Monson's such a smart man. Wonderful man. We like to refer to him as Uncle Tom, but we do have an Uncle Tom too, so it's kind of confusing. But anyway, when faith replaces doubt, I love this line, when selfless service eliminates selfish striving. Like, wow. When selfless service eliminates selfish striving. That is a mouthful, but it is a mantra to put on your mirror and remember, so that if you are in selfless service, it's eliminating selfish striving. You're no longer thinking about yourself. The power of God brings to pass his purposes. Whom God calls, God qualifies. Isn't that beautiful? Anyway, I'm going to leave you with that part. So what can we learn from Enoch this week? Think about it. What can you learn from Enoch? What can we all learn from Enoch? We'd do a little better to look at Enoch and stop looking at the world. All right, hang around for the rest of them because they're good.